let's zoom out for a bit. For the odd person who has like clicked on this episode, seeing the title, who vaguely wants to design their life but doesn't really know how to, or like what this really entails, what's your pitch to them? Why do you think they should go about designing their life?
Let me say the following to those people. So, what if we could live a life more by design than by default? And what that would lead to is, and we, to some extent, we do that, right? So, I invite you to design your lives, which means living life by design and not by default, which means being intentional about what you're doing, leading to greater sense of happiness, well-being, purpose, meaning, and flourishing. And what if I said that we have an amazing framework from Stanford University? And what if it's already tested and validated over the last 15 years? So welcome to the framework and welcome to being intentional about designing your life toward greater flourishing.
Okay, wow. Yeah, no, I think from what I picked up from what you just said, I think that implies a certain degree of intentionality.
Yeah.
And one thing I remember from your class, you had mentioned about how we live life, like in all other aspects, slightly intentional. We're intentional about our clothes, about our meals, and so on. But we're not intentional about our life, at least not intrinsically. And I wanted to know why that is.
Yeah, it's a journey really. To some extent we are, to some extent we are not. I think we're also driven a lot by the voices, noises, events that surround us. There's just so much of chatter all around, and so much, well, there's so much of pace also of life. I remember, Brené Brown's quote, and she says, we're so busy that truth isn't able to catch up. And so what is going on is we're all kind of doing stuff, and that's great. But we're not sitting and pausing and reflecting to really, really understand who we are, what lights us up, and therefore being intentional, taking intentional steps so that we can, you know, be more aligned to really at the essence level who we are. So, yes, we are intentional, and I think we can be more. And this is a journey towards self-awareness and a journey towards taking actions based on that self-awareness. So, at its core, that is what intentionality does, right? You become more self-aware, and then you have certain clarity of purpose. You make some decisions aligned to the essence of who you are, and you move forward. So, yeah, I just think there's too much chatter that's surrounding us in our lives.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's why I am curious to know, like, what are those moments in your life that got you into this, into first designing your own life and then deciding to teach others this framework?
Yeah, Ishan, I've thought about that, and I would, no sexy story here. I'm not going to say a penny dropped and I had this epiphany. I think it all started long, 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 long ago when I decided straight out of college to do my own, well, what we call startup today, but to start up on my own. And, 35 years ago when, it was a decision. It was quite a decision. But what started to happen is as you're building your own venture and enterprise, there are so many lived experiences and so many things that you do and some failures that you have and some successes that you have. Actually, that venture and the journey of the venture almost becomes a microcosm to your life. It is there, and the learnings that start to happen and the epiphanies that happen about venture creation start to apply to your life. And you say, my goodness, this is also not only a startup called QAI, but this is a startup called you. And we are all startups called you. And we are also building as we are going ahead and pivoting and failing. And in the startup, we look at product market fit for customers. In your own lives, you're looking for quote unquote product market fit for yourself, right? So the journey is actually, I think the penny drop, if I may call it that or whatever, will happen because at a time before that, I was just going with the flow or being swept by the flow. But the moment I said, okay, I'm going to build something, it started to dawn on me that there's a huge analogy to life. And a startup is nothing but a microcosm of the bigger journey. So I think that's where it started many years ago, and it just compounded over the years. Second part of your question was, when did you decide to teach this to others? Again, I'll go back 30, 35 years ago, even when I was a young person like yourself, and I was starting out. I think from the beginning, I just think intuitively or otherwise, I've had this feeling what I think McKinsey calls a coachable point of view. So irrespective of age, along the way, one always shared one's own experiences with the team here. Many of them were young or younger, and the whole dialogue of sharing was extremely fulfilling for me. And I've continued that over the years. And, if you ask me what's the biggest payoff of this journey, it's not the money, it's not the fame, it's not the respect that I get from outside. And all that's been great, and I have great gratitude for it. But it's actually been working with amazing people and touching their lives and having that dialogue all the time. And I'm not saying this just as a to sound good, but to me the biggest payoff has been the people that whose lives one has touched, and they have touched mine. And that's what QAI has been for me over 35 years. So yeah.
Wow, I think you have quite the story. I mean, you told us in class also how you were in IIT and then you went for your PhD, and it's really quite the roller coaster. I wanted to know, how did you land up in Stanford, and take us into that experience at Stanford where you became a Stanford instructor, certified instructor.
Actually, yeah, I landed up during the pandemic. So all this while, I was a design enthusiast. That has been something that I've been very fond of, not just designing your life, but design as a discipline, design as a thought process, design as actually a stance in life and how you solve things and build stuff. So now I'd read the book by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And during the pandemic, actually, I didn't even go there. I discovered that, and they pivoted to online engagements. And so I went through the coaching journey and certification, then the educator's journey and certification with them, and then a year later or sometime later, the facilitator's journey. And, we had a lot of support from them. I went through all that. And they're just amazingly supportive people. I have great gratitude for them, for how they've supported us in this journey.
I'm just picking up from what you said. You had mentioned Brené Brown, you had mentioned Dave Evans. I wanted to know, who are these? I mean, of course, Brené Brown's TED Talk is, I think, one of the most viewed TED Talks. It's really quite a powerful piece of media. Who are these? Who are the people who you would say have really influenced you on this journey, even outside your work with designing teaching
Yeah.
people this framework?
Right. So, of course, Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, the two professors at Stanford, they're design professors, and the book had great influence when it's specifically for the framework called Designing Your Life, and it resonated well. Outside of that, who's influenced me a lot? Several people, and I would say not just the known branded thought leaders, gurus, but several others, youngsters in the office. They've been very inspiring. Some of them have just been amazing. And so I'm extremely, drawn to you also, because I just think that there's so much you learn from young people and with a twinkle in their eyes and trying to do stuff that you can pick up on. Having said that, of course, a few people, my dad and everything, but I'm going to also say, or I'd like to, it's not a cliche. It is, but for me, it's not. I've learned most, and I don't want to sound cute or anything, but I've learned most from life. So if you said, okay, there's one person, one book, I can't even name any. I've learned from everyone, but I've really learned from life. And I think, to me, lived experiences and reflections on life, that doesn't mean I don't read, and it doesn't, I mean, I'm an avid reader. I observe, I have people I respect a lot, and at all ages and all stages in life, one learns from them. But ultimately, you learn from life. And I truly, truly believe that. And that's why I'm so passionate about life. Remember the Tata's ad when they launched the Nano many years ago, it was more car per car. And my motto is more
Yeah.
life per life. How can we really live life to the hilt? And there's so much to experience and learn. So I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna just say I've learned from life.
Really powerful stuff, sir. So, what I wanted to do, I wanted a potential listener to be able to take this interview and then get on and start working. And so, I think at the beginning, when you're starting anything, I mean, you'll know this better than anyone when you're starting any venture, if you're starting any project, it's important to ask yourself the right questions. And so,
Yes.
if when someone comes up to you and says that they want to, you know what, sir, I'm convinced and I want to start designing my life, what are those questions I need to ask myself?
Right. No. Let me again, at the risk of oversimplification, say there are two buckets here. One is, what should I do, or what do I, what actions do I take? What should I do? What is this all about? Is a starting point. But the other one, the more important one, is for them to get on the journey, is to ask yourself, who am I? Right. So before very often we'll cut to the chase and start doing stuff and planning and acting on stuff, which is very important. That's a design thinker's superpower and mentality as well, to act and a bias for action. And a lot of us have got so used to acting on stuff that we're not spending enough time. And so the first step is, what do I want? Who am I? And what do I want? Because what's the point of going on a road and discovering, well, and that's inevitable, but discovering that that's not who you are or what you want. So the whole thing about life design is, at every stage of life, for we first sit down and empathize with self, ask ourselves, what is it that we want? What does success mean to us? What are we passionate about? But what are we good at? What are our values? And what's our work view? And what does work mean to us? And what does life mean to us? And there's this whole first stage, the first step I tell anyone. And once you've done that, actions start to drop out. They precipitate from there. So spend, as we do in design thinking, a lot of time in what we call the empathy phase. And in this case, empathy for self, and do those reflections. And that's the
Okay.
first step, right? And once you've done the first step, there's a series of steps as per the framework. I won't get into great detail, but once one is done that, then you're like a sailboat. So you're on that journey, but you might have leakages. And the metaphor of a sailboat as applied to life is that you might have limiting beliefs which are holding you back, emotional baggage, stuff that's not allowing you to move forward and enjoy the journey. And so the second thing we do in designing your life is to look at dysfunctional beliefs or limiting beliefs, or gravity problems, as we call it. There's gravity is you cannot negotiate with gravity. It's a fact, right? And sometimes we are fighting gravity, the quote unquote gravity in our lives, and getting distressed about it. Actually, you can't fight it. It's a fact. It's a circumstance. But we can reframe it to feel better and to build forward. So the first big thing is empathy. The second big thing is to be able to move forward by shedding some emotional angst and baggage and limiting beliefs, feeling empowered. The third I would say piece that they need to do or people need to do is look at what energizes you, what puts you in states of flow and that lights you up. And the fourth then you'll do is from there think of possibilities about the future and not planning for the future. But the real shift in designing your life is to move from planning to possibility. And then you can come back to planning. We're so focused on planning and saying, I got to do this and I got to do this and I got to do this. But actually, as designers, our whole approach is what's possible. And and once you've done what's possible, then you try stuff, which we call prototyping, and then you scale from there. So yeah, it's a series of tools, steps, reflections, but in a gist, that's how the journey goes.
The EDIPT framework, right? EDIPT.
Right.
Right. I wanted to dig into limiting beliefs. In all the people that you have interacted with, what are some of the mental roadblocks that you find that recur?
Yeah. Yes, lots. And at all ages, I have them, you have them, and we've been collecting limiting beliefs from all our students' cohorts. We've been collecting them from adults. But let me say a few. Okay. One of the biggest ones, and we know that, but I'm going to say it because it comes up again, is, what others will think about failure. So we always are limited because of what others will feel. So that keeps coming up. The second one that keeps coming up is I'm too late. I've already missed a bus. I should have done this earlier. Now it's too late. Now who's going to give me that job or that course or go back to college or go back to it or pivot or it's too late. And especially people in the 30s, but I also youngsters, although they're just starting out, many of them think it's too late. And then we say that you're late for what? Unpack that. What are you late for? And it's amazing how even a young person in college starts to believe they're too late. So that's third, of course, is a loaded statement, and people will generalize and beat up on themselves by saying, I'm not good enough. And that's a big limiting belief, again, with a lot of people, all ages. So we say, let's unpack what does I'm not good enough mean. These are the bigger ones, and they're very much more specific ones. But you know what, Ishan, we've been talking to them and collecting from every cohort. We have hundreds of limiting beliefs, and it's just fascinating, all of us, without realizing how many we carry that limit us. And so, yeah, one big part of designing your life is to work on these, because then we can move forward and, feel more empowered.
So a story just came to my mind, and this isn't even about designing your life. It's about just taking up a certain project where this one friend of mine, she said, Ishan, I love your art because I do some drawing. And I said, wow, that's great. You should also try it. And she's like, no, it's too late now. I'm 27. And I was like, you are just 27. There is so much time. And so I think there's,
Yeah.
I think it's sort of correlated to the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think people think that they've sunk in so much time that they're already too deep and they can't pull themselves out and try
Yeah.
something new. But it's not really you're not giving up something to try something else. You're just opening up new avenues.
You're right. And, the sunk cost fallacy, and we're so, taken in by that. So one of the first slides in designing your life that we start with, which is actually also a poster or whatever at Stanford, is you are here. And the whole thing is you are here. You're not too late. You're not too early. There's no, you could have done that. You should have done that. This is where you are at. And we'll build from here. Okay, so, and that's very powerful. And that's alluding to what you're saying. If we had what we call the 0-day mentality, today it is, right, the first day of the rest of your lives. And it is. And if you approach today with a day zero mentality, there is no could haves, no should haves, no lates, no earlies, no regrets. You do and you build from where you're at and do stuff that you'd love to do and fire you up and give you a fulfilling, flourishing life from today. So that's actually one of the first slides or conversations we have in designing your life. And if we can, really, it's not so easy, but once we can shed the and really take the you are here and we'll start from where you're at. That's very powerful, very useful.
It's funny how so much of this is just in our heads. Like, this is the only place where all these beliefs are. And so, could you walk us through how we could reframe some of those beliefs into beliefs that actually serve us? And even a few examples would be great.
Yeah. You know, so reframing, if anyone's listening, if there's one thing I want, what I would highly recommend is to build a muscle for reframing. It's served me very well, and it's so core to how designers do things. And what is a reframe? A frame is something that kind of characterizes a product, and a reframe opens up the space for solutions, right? And so what you're doing with reframe is you're really just opening up a solution space. And when you open up the solution space, you can move forward because now you have more options and you have less baggage. So see, reframes could happen for life situations. Reframes could happen for limiting beliefs. At all steps, you can reframe. So let's take an example of a reframe that I would use in a work context, and then we'll come to a limiting belief as well. In a work context, we have people who leave the company. There's attrition, like any company, and it's inevitable. Which company and which person will stay for life in a company. So one can brood over it and say, "Oh my God, of course we'll try to retain them," and "Oh my God, we lost this person," da 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 da, and complain about how much training and emotional energy we put into him or her. And the reframe is, people will leave. They have grown, and we take pride in the fact that they've grown and they're going elsewhere. And the reframe, or the way we look at it, is that they haven't left, and what we say is they're forever QAites. And because of that, the body language, the energy, the emotion, everything changes. And I cannot tell you how much value we've got back from our alumni, orders of magnitude more than while they were here in that brief stage. So they go out into to the real world. And now we're not upset that we're losing someone. We're celebrating their success. Of course, we try to retain them, but should they get a much, much better opportunity, they're forever QAites. And that reframe has allowed us to engage with our alums and have a great network of alums who are always giving back. So that's a reframe. The other one, which is more to do with what's in the mind, and of course, this is also was a mind shift, but is, a lot of us, which is one of the big limiting beliefs, which I'll also talk about when you ask me which are the ones that keep coming up, is, I don't have enough experience. This is my favorite one because it's so much to do with venture building and everything else. I don't have enough experience to do X. And the reframe and is that, experience comes from experience. And so suddenly, you're saying, I can't do this, I can't do this, I don't have experience. And the same applies for I don't have money or I don't have something. But let's stick to the I don't have experience. Well, there are 24-year-old kids who have built billion-dollar companies. There are 30-year-old kids who have built billion-dollar companies. They didn't have experience. They got experience by experiencing. And that's a reframe. And it just suddenly liberates you and opens up the space for solutions and moving forward. So look at how much power there is. You're stuck saying, I can't move forward. I'm not 42 years old yet. Or you can say, I can move forward and I will gain experience through experience. And so that's just one example, but you can just about reframe anything to move yourself forward by opening up the solution space. And what a reframe conceptually does is it widens the solution space so you can generate options, so you can move forward without feeling held down or stuck. In some sense, you're opening up the box.
So, do you believe in personality types? And the reason I ask that is I just wonder that are some personality types more like prone, or rather, like, do they find it easier to reframe a problem that they face as opposed to others?
So here's what I think. And yes, our lived experiences, maybe even nature, some amount of nurture or whatever, gets us to being who we are. That's personality type. Having said that, all of this is a muscle, it's a skill, and we can build it. Now, maybe some people have in some space a little more talent than somebody else. That doesn't mean you can't work on it and build it. So my personal view is it comes down to grit and discipline and practice and building the muscle for almost anything in life, enough to serve you. You may need to have with it extraordinary talent if you want to be the Wimbledon champion. They have talent and the grit. But 99% of the people, 99% of the times can build stuff which will serve them. They may not end up being the Olympic champion unless, their certain amount of innate talent starts to kick in. But as far as all of us are concerned, for our lives, you can certainly practice to become a great reframer. And once you do that, it's almost, you can do it by reflex action. I mean, literally in the moment, and that's the designer's superpower. That's what designers do all the time. They will always look at things instantly in a different way. We can be trained to do that too. And then decide on the way forward, but I think it's a muscle that can be built and must be built for sure. And there are tools, there are techniques. It's a question of practice.
I love that you mentioned grit. I think of Angela Duckworth's work with grit as fundamental to who I am. That's a book.
Oh,
I
is
I
that
have it.
right?
I have it somewhere here.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right here. One second.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah. This
oh, lovely.
and it's an old, battered copy. My dad actually just picked this up in a bookstore, and I mean, he had no idea how. I return to this like every maybe 3 months, so that I just remind myself of this. I think what you said also about vulnerability. I think that's what it boils down to. All of this boils down to being vulnerable with yourself, and I think that's its courage. It takes courage. If it takes its own kind of courage.
Yes, it does. It
Yeah.
does. And it takes courage. And then once you're vulnerable, you also build courage. So, it kind of feeds on each other, and you're building courage, and also vulnerability, fuels creativity. Yeah, vulnerability is something also not easy to do. You're not born with it. Okay, I'm more vulnerable. But again, it is something you can practice and work on. As Brené Brown would also say, it comes down to, almost everything comes down, whatever you're good at, passionate about, want to achieve, it comes down to you got to work at it. You just have to.
Uh,
There.
sir, do you wait? I was going to ask something. Or it was just on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, I think, and this is something that Angela Duckworth also talks about.
Yeah.
This having this bias to action, and that this is something
Yeah.
that came up in your class as well. And
Yes.
so, I mean, I strongly believe in that. I strongly believe that when you feel the inspiration to do something, go ahead and do it at that very second. And I can really picture many listeners at this point
Yeah.
in the conversation who
Yeah.
really want to get started. And so what are some of the actionable steps that they can take right now, or at least right after they listen to this entire episode?
Yeah. So great. And bias to action is again another huge, huge, huge value that you could have. But your question is, what is that action they can take right away? I would say, you got to take a very first small step. Otherwise, it kind of tends to not happen. So the first thing is go and, just if you want to get on the journey and really study designing your life, the framework, just go and see a few videos. Yeah, nothing else. Read a small thing, Google designing your life, see a few videos, see whether that's making sense to you, because that'll be the fuel for the next step. Okay. So this is bias to action for getting on the designing your life journey. Now, if there's a bias to action for life in life, forget the framework, then just ask yourself one question: where do I feel stuck? Just one thing. Maybe it's 20 things, like all of us are stuck. And ask yourself, just sit down for 5 minutes for that one teeny weeny bit of a thing which is holding you back, and say, what can I do with this? That means, can I reframe this? Can I unpack this? Am I really condemned by this statement? And what is my one small way forward? And you'll be amazed when you start to pack it. It's not that damning, and we're not condemned. So, and that just gives you that little energy. But it's a 10-minute, 5-minute exercise, and you'll move forward. So I would say that, where do you feel stuck? Just sit with that for 10 minutes and see where it takes you.
Such a simple thing to do, but yet
Just
it's so
simple
powerful.
thing. It is powerful. It is very valuable, to your listeners. Just ask yourself what you're stuck at, feeling stuck, and then unpack it.
Wow. So where does journaling come into this? I think, like, to me, journaling seems like a
Yeah.
low effort, get high reward sort of activity. And so how does that fit in here?
Journaling, over the years, we've seen a lot of people prescribe it, psychologists and everything. In designing your life, also, we ask you to do that, because journaling does many different things. And it's also now being backed by neuroscience. It's not just. So firstly, journaling means you start to write. And writing has a huge value, which also is researched. And so there are two pieces to this. What does the act of journaling do, and what does the act of writing do? Okay. So you could journal, you could have a gratitude journal, you could have a stream of consciousness journal. You're just writing your stream of consciousness. You could have a planning journal for actions to take, and what worked, what didn't work. So there's different flavors you can do for journaling, right? But what that does is, it brings it from one part of the brain to the prefrontal cortex, basically in neuroscience. So now there's greater clarity, greater rationality, and intentionality that's starting to happen. Okay. So, and the same work, and basically the act of writing is extremely powerful, because in some ways, when you're articulating and you're writing, you're creating those, pathways in the brain. You are being reflective. You are being with yourself. You are having conversation with yourself, all of which in our busy life, and going back to, we're so busy that truth doesn't have time to catch up. So journaling is that pause where not only is truth catching up with you and you're having a dialogue with yourself, but it's also in some sense rewiring the pathways in your brains. And so it's a highly recommended practice. People who have done it have seen great value to it. And there's some science behind it, but this has been on for decades. And in designing your life, as part of the course, we ask people to journal. And I've seen that a lot of them, after their first time, they said, oh my goodness, this was valuable, and we'll continue.
I think I can really attest to that. I started journaling every day, perhaps 2-3 years ago, somewhere during the pandemic. And I think it really revealed who I was to myself, which is the best sort of thing, because I thought I knew myself, but it was only that daily act of writing and actually forcing myself to finish one page a day.
You
I think
did.
that's yeah. And now it's like I won't sleep until I have one page written.
Wow.
One
That's
one
something.
yeah, and I would recommend it to anyone. I think the few people who actually take this advice and do it will know the difference.
Yeah. It processes emotions. Its journaling is also metacognition. You're thinking about how you're thinking. You're starting to be aware of how you're feeling. You're creating pathways in your brain. So yeah, it's
I think you can actually feel these, or rather sense these pathways being formed. And I'll tell you why.
uh-huh.
I feel like right now, when we're not writing, our thoughts are just muddled in our brain. But when we have to force fit those things into words, one word after the other, then just that very act of distilling things into something that is coherent makes you understand what you are trying to say and what you are truly experiencing.
True, true, true. And that's a great point you've made. And I think it's called cognitive load therapy or technique or whatever. But yeah, it creates clarity, cognitive clarity when you put it in words. So words, writing, vocabulary, incredibly powerful things, which again, in today's day and age, we're doing less and less of. We're doing less writing. Spending less time with yourself. We're always busy. So, well, people, and we all have to find time and space to get in touch with ourselves.
Okay, so I have a closing tradition on this podcast where I ask every guest one question, and you can take this however you'd like. If you had access to billboards all across the world for a day, what is one message you would put up there?
Yeah, I know you had asked me this, and so Ishan, I'll answer in two ways. One is a one-word way, and one I will read out because I feel so strongly. It's a paragraph, and you had said to me that come with a paragraph or come with a so the one-word answer or the three-word answer in the billboards, because again I'm repeating what I'm saying, but I so believe is reframe, reframe, reframe. Okay. To me, that's worth putting on billboards. And that's just gotten me so much, not just emotionally, but in hacks and ways forward and so on and so forth. The other is a paragraph which I'm extremely fond of. So I'm going to take this opportunity and read it out. And maybe you've already, and it's called The Man in the Arena. Have you read it? No. So
It rings
Theodore,
a bell.
yeah, Theodore Roosevelt. And this is to some extent, one's stance. So I'm going to read this out to you. It's a small little paragraph, but goes the following. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So it's the man in
Wow.
the arena. So to me, that's extremely inspiring. Be the man in the arena. And that's if you fail greatly and dare to put yourself out there. And to me, that's also the essence of how I like to live my life, and which is being in the arena.
Professor, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ishan. Wonderful talking to you, and talk to you again. Bye.